If you've ever been confused by mortgage interest deduction, this is the video for you. We're going to talk about what it is, how to know if you'll benefit or not, and what you need to know. I'm here with Valerie Adelman. She's a certified financial planner and tax expert. She's been in the financial services industry for over 30 years and specializes in tax issues. Thank you so much for doing this, Valerie.
Thank you for having me.
So Valerie, what exactly is mortgage interest deduction?
When you buy a home and you borrow money to buy that home, you're charged interest, and that interest is called mortgage interest. That's where your potential tax deduction comes from. So when you pay back the loan to borrow money to buy your home, some portion of the money goes towards principal and another portion goes towards the interest. The interest, again, is the part that's tax deductible. Your tax deduction is based upon your tax bracket. So if, for example, you are in a 20% tax bracket, and let's say you are paying $1,000 a month for your mortgage, and $800 of that $1,000 monthly payment is the interest component. 20% of 800 is $160. That would be your tax deduction. So while you still have to come up with $1,000 a month, you get a $160 tax deduction in this example, which means on an after-tax basis, it costs you $840. So that's where the tax benefit comes from. The benefit differs depending on your tax bracket. If you are in a higher tax bracket, you should also be aware of the fact that itemized deductions or that tax benefit can be phased out. And it is possible that you only get 20% of that benefit.
That's very interesting. And just to clarify, if you pay your mortgage every month, you don't get any benefit at that point. You get it at the end of the year when you file your taxes.
Correct. The tax benefit is calculated on your tax return. However, you can change your allowances through your paycheck so that you get more take-home money each month or each paycheck, so that you have more money to make that upfront mortgage payment and get the tax benefit during the year as opposed to waiting to get a larger refund at the end of the year.
So for 1 year, every time I pay my mortgage payment, I'm paying a portion of it in interest. And so you add up each month's portion of interest into the total amount for the year, and that amount is tax deductible.
Correct. The annual amount of mortgage interest that you pay is the tax deductible portion that you put on your tax return. That's correct.
Why is it important for home buyers and homeowners to understand mortgage interest deduction?
It's important for people who are buying a home to understand whether it makes more sense for them to actually buy a home and get that potential mortgage interest deduction, or whether it makes more sense for them to rent.
How do you know for sure that you're going to get the benefit of the mortgage interest deduction?
Whether you benefit from the mortgage interest deduction depends upon how you file on your tax return and whether you exceed the standard deduction. So what I mean by how you file is what your filing status is. Do you file as single, as married, separate, or joint, or head of household? Each one of those filing statuses comes with a standard deduction. That standard deduction is a certain amount of deductions that the government automatically gives you. If your actual deductions exceed that standard deduction, you get a tax benefit. How do you determine whether your actual deductions exceed the standard deduction? That has to do with many other deductions, including medical deductions, charity, miscellaneous work expenses, taxes. So when you add up all of those other deductions, and if in total they exceed the standard deduction, then the mortgage interest, which is a part of that, will give you a tax benefit. So it's fairly complicated. There are many factors, and you do need to make sure that you understand whether you will get that benefit or not.
And it can change year to year, right? So maybe 1 year you won't get you'll take the standard deduction, and the next year maybe your status would change and you'd qualify for something else. Is that correct?
Right. It is possible 1 year you file single, another year you file married. 1 year you take the standard deduction, 1 year you take actual expenses. So your tax situation changes year to year. Not to mention that when you pay back a mortgage, there is something called an amortization schedule, which outlines how much of your monthly payment goes towards principal and how much goes towards interest. And over time, you have paid back the interest typically up front. So at the end of the mortgage payment, you're paying back mostly principal, which is not tax deductible. So over time, your deduction changes and actually goes down.
Right. So in the beginning of a mortgage, I would get a higher benefit if I could take the benefit than further on down the road when I'm paying much less interest.
That is absolutely correct.
What if you have a second home? Can you use the mortgage interest deduction on your second home or only your primary home?
You can deduct mortgage interest on up to 2 homes. That is it.
So for home buyers, what would you recommend that they do in order to make sense of this to know for sure that they're getting the benefit?
It is imperative that people who are considering purchasing a home seek the assistance of a tax professional. That way they know whether they get a tax benefit or not, what that benefit might be, what they will be paying up front versus what the tax benefit or after-tax benefit will be. So it is important that they check with their tax professional to make sure that this all makes sense. It is very complicated.
So Valerie, I just want to thank you so much for being with us and being the expert that you are and sharing your expertise. Mortgage interest deduction sometimes seems simple, but it's obviously very complicated, and it's so important that we understand what it is.
Thank you for having me.
Get our free resource to tell whether you benefit from mortgage interest deduction. Go to www.homeownering.com/MID.